Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Album of Record podcast. I'm Craig Lyndall, joined as always by Andrew. How's it going, buddy?
Going pretty good, making sure we're not talking at the same time on purpose or accidentally this week. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty in last week's episode, and it's the software we use spliced our audio at improper timing. So it was like trailing off where when I was still talking, Craig would start talking. And then when Craig was done talking, there would be a gap until I would start talking. So our apologies for that, but I'm back in my home setup. Everything should be good now.
Yeah, the good news is that the first 30 minutes were clean. That's when
Yeah.
we got our big takes on Pearl Jam Dark Matter out of the way. Um, and we're not going to dedicate this entire episode once again to Dark Matter, but we did think that with the glowing reviews and how early we were to review it, that maybe we ought to circle back not quite a week later and talk about how we're still feeling about it, talk about some of the other reviews out there. Then we're going to talk about the new Cloud Nothings record, which was also released on the same day as Pearl Jam and Taylor Swift. And you and I are both huge Cloud Nothings fans. That record is called Final Summer. We're going to get into that one in a little bit. But first, we've got IndieCast talked about Dark Matter. We finally got a Pitchfork review today. It's been not quite a week. Well, I guess it's been a week since you were in the theater.
Yep.
So how are we feeling now about the record, and just kind of the chatter around it a few days later?
So yeah, when we recorded the episode last week, I had gone to the theater event. They played the album twice, so I had heard it twice that way, and I think it had leaked online before we recorded that. So I think I had heard it another couple times that way, if I remember correctly. I think I had heard it more than the two times when we recorded the episode. But now sitting here a week later, I have listened to it. God, I don't know how many times. Like I I'm really struggling to listen to other things right now. I just find myself wanting to put this on repeat. And something that Craig and I talk about all the time. It's the power of the closing song on an album, but a great opening track also can fuel that cycle. So what happens is Setting Sun is such a powerful closing track for this that it makes me excited to listen again. And when I hit play again, Scared of Fear is the first track, which I absolutely love that song. That chorus gets stuck in my head like crazy. It's such a great opening track. So I'm just like right back into it. And then we're off to the races again. In general, I would say I am, strangely enough, more enthusiastic about this album today than I was when we recorded it. I was still trying to apply some caution. We even talked about it later in the episode, I think, saying, hey, what are the chances that we're going to look back on this and not feel the same way a little bit later, that this is all just the newness of the album. That was definitely a legit concern for me. But now that I've listened to this album many, many, many times, and my enthusiasm for it has only grown as I listen and hear different guitar parts I didn't notice the first time, different things they're doing musically. This is just such a complete album. And I'm going to harken back real quick to something I said in last week's episode, that I said I felt this album was the spiritual successor to Yield. And I feel more strongly that way today than I did when I said that, because again, this album doesn't sound like Yield. I'm not saying it's this like the natural album that came after it, but to me, Yield was the last time they really went beginning to end, toe to toe, a complete album, a good mix of some slower songs, the mid-tempo stuff, and some of the rockers. Like this kind of does that same thing. There's no throwaway tracks here. There's nothing that I'm not going to be enthusiastic to hear live off this album. Literally every single song I would be ecstatic to see live. And I just haven't felt that way since Yield. And so that's kind of where I'm sitting right now. And I find myself thinking some pretty crazy thoughts when I think about this, because I find myself wondering how sure am I that being my 6th favorite Pearl Jam album is actually the ceiling for this album. That's how strongly I feel about it. I know not everybody agrees, and that's fine. Like, I'm cool with that. But just for me and the type of fan I am and what I want out of Pearl Jam, this is just hitting all the buttons for me. So how about you? How are you sitting with it here a week later?
Yeah, so I've also been pretty obsessed with it, struggling to listen to other things other than Cloud Nothings for the most
Yep.
part. I'm wearing a brand new dad hat from the Spanish Love Songs show I went to this weekend, and normally when I would go see a show, especially a show of a band I love, I would listen to that record after going to the show.
Right.
I can honestly say I have not put Spanish Love Songs on since the show, and I will, and I still love that band. But that just goes to show the gravity of this record right now. I guess for me, the I it's feeling a little bit more organized in my brain, where this album feels like it has sections, and the first section ends with Dark Matter, the second section ends with Waiting for Stevie, and then I'm not I almost feel like there's a section that ends with Got to Give and Setting Sun as its own section. Um, but I'm with you. It's still the connective tissue of the last song to the first song are really, really powerful. And then additionally, because of how the record flows and how all the songs work together, even the one I stand by all my criticism of React Respond and even Something Special. Something Special still, I don't know if it's King of the Road or one of those kind of bouncy oldies, but it feels like Pearl Jam wrote their own oldie in the year 2024. Um, but even those songs, while I stand by my criticism of them, I've now I've now accepted them and I like them. I wouldn't skip them. I don't dread them coming up in the playlist. This feels like a cohesive record from beginning to end. And to your point, what you were saying about some of that material since Yield, we have not had the cohesive record that I would find myself not skipping or not wanting to skip things on the way through. And I understand that not everybody feels the way that I do. And I do think that we should probably talk about some of the criticism of this record, especially some of the criticism by the biggest and oldest Pearl Jam fans. I'm not surprised by it. I don't think you're wrong. But I kind of feel sorry for those fans that they don't like it. I'm not saying that they should or that they're bad fans or that they don't get it. I'm not gatekeeping. I just in my I'm 45. There were some comments on the YouTube this past week where people thought we were young. I'm 45 years old. I was 12 years old when 10 came out. So we're not as young as we look, I guess. I don't know. But no, so I feel sorry for you because I want everybody to enjoy this as much as you and I are enjoying it. And I know that's not possible, but I wish it was possible.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell anybody they're wrong for what they want out of Pearl Jam. If you fell in love with Pearl Jam because of the angst of the 90s and that sound, and that's just what you want out of Pearl Jam, you're not wrong in wanting that. So I'm not going to sit here and criticize anybody for feeling that way. But I also share in your like, God, I wish I could make you hear this album the way I hear it. I wish it could make you feel the things that I feel when I listen to this album, because I mean, this album just has like, just there's so many different emotions throughout this album. I think this is some of Ed's best lyric writing. His vocal melodies are phenomenal at conveying a lot of these emotions that you feel. And there's so much longing and loss in these lyrics. Like, these are like some heavy songs, and I don't know if there's anything specific to Ed or something, anything like that. I have no idea the context for a lot of these, but they're just beautifully written songs that can just really pull at certain emotions from you. But it's different than that angry band of the 90s. Like, you go back, like the Pearl Jam of 10 versus Vitology, for sure. Like, that was an angry band. It was us against the world, 5 against 1. Like, it was
Not for you.
Yeah, not for you. Like, I mean, these were 5 guys trying to figure out who they are, screaming into the void, and they're just not that band anymore. You listen to these interviews with them. Just today, there was a podcast on YouTube. Oh my God, is it Broken Record? Is that what it's called?
I
Shoot.
think it's Malcolm. It was Malcolm Gladwell, and but yeah,
Yeah, they interviewed Jeff and Stone, and you can just hear they talk about how at peace they are with this band. Like, this is a comfortable, confident band that's just, it's a different unit, and that those dynamics are different, and so the way they approach songwriting is different. And how you feel about this as a Pearl Jam fan, I'm not talking about the people who are independent and just hearing this without any context, but as Pearl Jam fans, I think it's valid to say this isn't the Pearl Jam that I fell in love with, but for me, I've grown up with this band. Like you said, we were 12 years old when 10 came out. We've been riding with this band ever since. It's been one of the most dominant factors and forces in my life as I've grown up. So I just feel like I've matured with this band. And so for me, where these songs hit kind of matches where I'm at in my life. And so that makes a lot of sense. I want to touch on a little bit on the Pitchfork review here in a second. But
well, before we get there, I want to interrupt you for 1 second, because one of the other things that they did this week is they went on the Howard Stern show. And for me, that's like a real full circle moment. I started listening to Howard Stern. I was riding the bus, I think in the 7th or 8th grade, listening to my old Walkman, listening to the radio, and I'm scrolling through the channels in Cleveland, and I hear somebody interviewing Flava Flav from Public Enemy. And that at that time, I was listening. My friends and I were listening to now the name escapes me. This was the '91 record with "Can't Trust It" and all those songs. And so but it was Howard Stern. And so I've been listening to Howard Stern off and on since the 8th grade. I've been listening to Pearl Jam off and on since the 8th grade. And Pearl Jam is out here on Howard Stern's show. Howard Stern's nothing like he was back in 1991 or 1992 either.
Sure.
He's not the shock jock he was. He's more politically correct. He's very politically aligned these days with one party. And so the idea that this band would be the same as they were back in 91 any more than Howard Stern would be the same dude he was back in 91. It's just insane. But there's like a thankfulness that they're both still around. Let's get into some of the reviews.
Real quick, I just want to mention, going back to that Jeff and Stone interview. One thing I just did want to throw in, I'm kind of interjecting this in the middle here, but I thought of it earlier when you said it. And since we talked about this podcast, the connective tissue you talked about between the final track and the first track. What's really cool about that I didn't know until listening to this interview today, Jeff talked about writing that intro interlude that starts the album before the billiard ball break at the start of Scared of Fear. And he actually crafted that by taking the chords that Ed plays on the acoustic at the end of Setting Sun and shifted it down into a different key, but then used that to build that opening interlude. So it kind of makes sense that it's like setting you up for that feeling coming right out of Setting Sun. And if you go right back into Scared of Fear, you're getting fed that same chord progression right back to you without even realizing it, which is a really, really cool touch. Nice job, Jeff.
Yeah. So all right. So we've got IndieCast, we've got Pitchfork. Where do you want to start?
Let's actually start with Pitchfork, because Pitchfork is the driving force in music criticism today. So I think that's probably a good place to start. Zach Schoenfeld, I don't know how you pronounce that, did the review, gave it a bit of a mixed review, as you would probably predict from Pitchfork, but ended up scoring it 6.4. And if you're looking for comparisons, Ian Cohen gave the Cloud Nothings album a 7.5, and the new Taylor Swift album, just the single album version, the original version, got a 6.6. But the anthology version, the double version of Taylor Swift, got a 6.0. So new Pearl Jam album taking out one version of a Taylor Swift album in 2024. But I'll throw it to you first for this one. Kind of what was your initial reaction upon reading this review in Pitchfork? How'd you feel about their review? Did you think it was fair? Were there things you took issue with?
So I thought it was fair. I thought maybe it was a little bit more negative than I would have wanted to be as a fan, but I think that's also kind of the job of a critic, especially a neutral non-fan critic. It's about actually, I was going to say it's about what I expected. It's better than what I expected from Pitchfork with a Pearl Jam record. I think it's on a Pitchfork curve, it's surprisingly positive. And ultimately it doesn't, I mean, first of all, it doesn't really matter to me other than it's an interesting topic of conversation for you and me. But no, I think they recognized what makes this record exceptional for Pearl Jam fans. They recognized the things that we are gravitating toward, the things that stick out to us. And I think some of the criticisms are valid. I think they called the production on a few of the songs kind of plasticky and compressed, and that's a criticism that a lot of modern music gets from the more analog sounding records and tapes and recordings from years past. So I think it does sound very modern, this record. So I hear that. It doesn't bother me, but I hear it and I understand it and I think it's valid. So I didn't really have a problem with any of the criticisms. I didn't think there were any super duper cheap shots. There certainly wasn't a video of a monkey peeing in its own mouth.
Victory. I mostly agree with all of that. Well, I want to circle back to the production a little bit in a second, but to talk about Pitchfork first, I'm just real quick going to run through some of the recent albums and just the scores. Riot Act got a 4.9, Avocado got a 5.5, Backspacer 4.6, Lightning Bolt 5.0, and then Gigaton was a 6.2. So that kind of shows you where Pitchfork has been with Pearl Jam for the past 15 years. And I think they saw...
Let me interrupt for 1 second. If Gigaton is a 6.2, this is easily a 7.0 or a 7.1.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with that. I do think the score 6.4 is too low, but I do think it shows like they viewed Gigaton very similar to how you and I did, like a bit of a return to something kind of interesting out of Pearl Jam. It was a little bit different. It wasn't perfect, but it was at least like something that kind of got us a little bit more excited than maybe some of the other recent albums had. But specifically talking about this review, the Dark Matter review, I told you a couple things annoying me. I get tired of every single review mentioning Mike McCready saying this album's heavier than you would expect, and Ed saying, I think it's our best work. I don't think I've read a single review that doesn't bring that up. And it feels so lazy to me. Like, first of all, there's nothing all that outrageous about what they said. Bands say that kind of stuff all the time about their albums. Like, there's nothing noteworthy or newsy about that. And it shouldn't shape how you interpret this album and how you feel about the album. However, I will say, I think Mike was right. I think this album is heavier than I probably expected. I don't necessarily think Ed was quite right, but I can actually see how Ed could come to that conclusion. And if you if you listen to these guys talk about the album, you can get, if you sign up for a free Sirius radio subscription, get the app, listen to Pearl Jam Radio, the track by track breakdown from the band members, listen to them talk about the process of how they wrote these songs, listen to them on Howard Stern, find this Jeff and Stone interview on this podcast. If you listen to what these guys are saying, this album is different in their songwriting approach, and it's the most complete, like, in the room writing together effort this band has maybe ever done, but certainly going back to probably like your Versus days in terms of writing like this. So I can understand where Ed's coming from that. The
other thing is, like, if you're one of the band members and you performed in the studio for this record and you are thinking about everything that you played on, and you're thinking about how heavy Dark Matter was, not only heavy but also one of the more quality melody driven songs that's also kind of upbeat and heavy, up tempo and heavy. Um, are you expecting them to say that, uh, yeah, we feel like this will have crossover appeal to adult contemporary radio, and no, we figure this is at least the sixth or seventh best record we've ever
Yeah.
made. I mean, it's just like it's like the sports, it's athlete quotes after games, you
Yes.
know.
Yeah, no,
We
that's
worked
spot on.
hard this week. We put our best effort out there on Sunday or Saturday or whatever day we were performing, and we let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah,
It went our way this time, or it didn't go our way this time.
tip your hat, all that stuff. But so that was sort of my one thing I didn't like necessarily agree with, and then I didn't really understand the part when he talks about the bridge in Dark Matter, and Ed sort of talking about tolerance and no tolerance for intolerance. And he's like, boy, that doesn't have quite the same impact or shock value as I'll never suck Satan's dick from Satan's bed. And it's like, well, okay, like, but like in 2024, like that's kind of a weird statement to say that way. Like, one of those is, I would argue, pretty sophomoric, and the other one is trying to make a valid point relating to the times that we live in. And typically, Pitchfork would be more applauding of somebody taking a thoughtful look at where we are in society and commenting on that, rather than going for shock value in their lyrics.
If they wrote that lyric in 2024, they'd accuse Pearl Jam of being anti-gay.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely
and
right.
maybe justifiably so. Like, whatever. I don't want to get into it.
We're not going to debate that right now. But the point being, it's a weird thing to put in a music criticism, I thought, of this album. And then finally, I just want to stand up a little bit for the Pearl Jam hard rocking songs. Like, they've taken a beating in some of these reviewings. Almost every review's like, well, they do that typical Pearl Jam hard rock stuff that nobody likes. And I'm like, you know what? I understand that a lot of people don't like him. I understand that the mid-tempo stuff is what people view Pearl Jam as being best at. But I'm going to stand up for some of these. Like, again, Scared of Fear, I love that song. React Respond, I really love that song. Running is great. I thought we did a whole like long episode breaking down Dark Matter, the song, when that came out. Like, it's an interesting song. It's not a clunker. It's not something that doesn't have thoughtful writing behind it. Like,
the problem with the criticism here is that it's out of date. If you want to, I like Spin the Black Circle. I got used to Spin the Black Circle. These heavy songs are so much more interesting and better written with better melodies than some of the heavy songs that Pearl Jam trotted out there because they wanted to be heavy and they wanted to pay homage to their punk rock roots.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like, and so there's a certain maturity and intricacy. And we talked about the fact that like a lot of these songs on Dark Matter, Pearl Jam couldn't have even written in the 90s. They weren't that space as songwriters. And that's not to say, again, that it's one is inherently better or worse than the other, but it's just where this band is at this time, that they can layer more interesting guitar parts on top of each other. And thanks to the production, not in spite of the production, but thanks to the production, if you listen with headphones, it has never been easier to separately hear what all the guitars are doing on a Pearl Jam album. And that's a big part of what I love about this album. So my final critique about this is my pushback on the production value of this record. I know, I hear you guys. We saw a lot of it in the comments of people. I don't like this album because I can't stand the production. I get it. I think it largely depends on how you're listening to this album, though. I've played around with like both Tidal and Spotify, the difference between the lossless and lossy compression, and both of those sound better depending on like where I listen. Like, I vastly prefer lossless in headphones, but in my car where I don't have as good of speakers, I actually prefer Spotify. The lossy to me smooths out that sound. It's not as harsh to my ears as the lossless are. So I do think some people should probably take that into consideration a little bit. But I'll just say, that you have never been able to more distinctly hear all the instrumentation on a Pearl Jam album. And I love that. I love that I can hear every single thing Stone Gossard is doing, because Stone is like my favorite one of my favorite guitarists ever. So,
well,
so
let
that's kind of
me
where I'm
just
at
say
with
this
that.
one thing, and I'm going to tread lightly. This is not a criticism of anybody who decided that they didn't want to continue to listen to new music after a certain point of time. A lot of people suspend animation and music their senior year of high school, or maybe their senior year of college, and with few exceptions, they stop listening to new music. If that's you, that's cool. You don't have to continue to listen to new music. I'm not making fun of you. That's your choice. But I'm saying those of us who do continue to listen to new music and have kept up with stuff, even stuff that we don't like because we want to kind of cover the waterfront and hear everything that's out there. I listened to the new Taylor Swift record this week, or most of it. It was hard to get through the whole thing for me. I
Yeah.
listened to the new Beyonce record a couple weeks ago, not because I'm a huge fan, but because I'm interested in the new things. And if you suspended animation sometime after Yield, this production is going to feel like a record scratch to you. It's going to sound insane to you. And that's not a criticism of you, but I get it. And maybe understand where you are versus where the entire
Sure.
universe is in terms of production. And maybe you even think it's a step backwards, and that's fine. But this record sounds very, very much in the moment and quality in the moment. And it's not, you may not like it, but that doesn't make it bad.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said.
So let's hit on IndieCast, and then let's move on to Cloud Nothings, because otherwise this
Yep.
is going to turn into another Pearl Jam podcast.
Yeah, for sure. So IndieCast also talked about this, and I knew Steven would talk about that. Steven Hayden, I knew he would talk about this.
He wrote a Pearl Jam book.
He wrote a Pearl Jam book.
Road.
What did he say? He said in the episode he would put his music critic bona fides of late era Pearl Jam up against any other music critic, and I think he's right. Like, so we knew he was going to have thoughts on the Pearl Jam album. Ian is a little bit harder to sometimes pin down where he is musically, and I didn't expect him to have any reaction to this album, positively or negatively whatsoever.
By the way, this is why I love that podcast so much, because Steven Hayden is like the Pearl Jam and kind of the indie rock, and then Ian Cohen leans real heavy into the emo stuff, which I lean really heavy into the emo stuff. So that's why I love that podcast so much.
Yeah, for sure. And so Steven was very, very complimentary of this album, extremely complimentary. I mean, he, in his written review for Up Rocks, he said it's, their best album in decades, something that, you and I both strongly agree with. He doesn't like the rockers as much as I do, but he quickly points out, Wreckage, which is my favorite song. He points to that as a standout. So that mostly went as expected. But what really surprised me was that Ian actually, well, first of all, I was surprised to learn that he does have a background with Pearl Jam. But he was with Pearl Jam through, he said Binaural, I think was the last one he bought. But so he said he has not paid attention at all to late era Pearl Jam, but he did check this one out, and he said he generally kind of liked it, which again, that's a big win. Like, it's like, yes, it's not a glowing review, and I think that's what you're hearing from a lot of critics who don't have a long relationship with Pearl Jam. I think a lot of them are listening to this and saying, well, regardless of whether I really like this band or not, like, I can acknowledge, like, this is an accomplishment for a band 30 years into their career, putting this out. And I think that's kind of where Ian ultimately came down on. And it was just nice to hear people who, I really respect and was very much interested to see if they would have anything to say. It was just good to hear that they responded positively to this album as well.
Yeah, and I didn't feel like it was over the top. I didn't think either of them were fanboying. I think it was kind of with some surprise in Ian's case that the record is as good as it is. And I think that I trust those guys not to lie. Like, if they thought it was crap, they would have said it was crap.
Oh
you
yeah.
know, and I think that they leveled a little bit of criticism.
Yeah.
So I thought it was perfectly fair and also really interesting to me that people who are even more professional at this than you and I are
Yeah.
had good things to say.
Um, I do have one closing thought because might be a while until we talk about this album again. Um, Today, I happened to go back and listen to Gigaton and Lightning Bolt just to see how it felt to listen to those albums. Now that I have Dark Matter, I was really curious to see how it would feel to listen to those. Um, the thing I think that surprised me the most was like listening to a song like Quick Escape, which when I first heard that song was such a breath of fresh air. And I was like, oh, I didn't know Pearl Jam still had this in them. Like, I thought it was a really intriguing late era Pearl Jam song. When I listened to it today, like, it felt flat to me. Like this, and I'm not talking about the production or anything like that. I'm just talking about the songwriting. Like, I didn't feel that it was as dynamically of a written song. And that's where you sort of feel the way they wrote this album, sort of breaking all these things apart and each member leaning into their strengths and putting their own quirks. And that's why I think that's why Dark Matter feels so much to me like this core quintessential Pearl Jam, because every member put what they bring to Pearl Jam into this record in a way they haven't done on the previous ones. And I felt that as I went back and listened to these albums. I still like the songs I like on those albums. So I'm not saying like, oh, those albums just are terrible to listen to now, but it's really interesting if you just go back and listen. I just think it validates all the things we've been saying about Dark Matter, that yes, this is something different. It is something that's going to stand apart from a lot of their other late era albums, and we're not just prisoners of the moment with it. So
And with that, we move on to Cloud Nothings. They had a new record out last week, same day as Pearl Jam and Taylor Swift. As I said, it's a record called Final Summer. And Cloud Nothings, for those who don't know, is a band from Cleveland, Ohio, my hometown ish. You know, I'm from the suburbs, but close enough. Dylan Baldy is the creative juggernaut behind Cloud Nothings, and he started the band kind of as a project in his dorm room at Case Western Reserve, kind of turned into a band. They've been around since 2009. Turn around, all of a sudden this band's been around 15 years, right?
yeah,
How crazy is
that's
that?
wild.
Yeah.
I think the lore is that Dylan was pegged to open a show in New York for, oh gosh, do you remember who it was? Shoot. It was another indie band that was well respected. I can't remember who it was. But anyways, so he basically had to put a band together because it was just him. So he had to put a band together to play this show. And I think in doing that, I don't know this for sure. This might be me projecting a little
They were
bit.
invited to open in Brooklyn, New York for the bands Woods and Real Estate.
Yep, Woods and Real Estate. Yep. Uh, I don't know this for sure, but I've always suspected that playing with a live band inspired something in Dylan to change what he wanted Cloud Nothings to be. Maybe he always intended it for it to become an actual band, but prior to that, it was bedroom pop. It was, it was just Dylan doing everything. And after doing that show, he then hired a drummer, Jason Gerwitz. I don't know if Garrix. I never know how to pronounce his last name. There's a lot of letters.
It's probably Jason Garrich. Let's just call him Jason Garrich.
All right, Garrich.
Because he's freaking awesome.
He's incredible. I mean, he is such a secret weapon. Like, he does not get enough recognition as one of the absolute, bar none, regardless of genre, absolute best drummers in the world right now. He is insane.
And by the way, his drum kit is a snare and a floor tom and a bass drum and some cymbals. It's not Danny Carey from Tool with a rack mounted arsenal of drums and equipment. Yeah. He does more with less than anybody this side of Death Heaven.
Yep. And so at this point, I would say those are like the two like steady longtime members of Cloud Nothings. They've cycled in a couple different bass players. The current bass player, whose name escapes me at the moment, was actually Chris Brown. Was actually there. He was actually the guitarist in the band when was it TJ was their last bass player, I think.
TJ Duke.
Yeah, and then when TJ left, they shifted Chris over to bass, and now I don't know if they tour with a second guitarist, or if Dylan just kind of does everything, just covers leads and rhythm himself. But they've certainly established themselves now as a longtime band, and it's kind of
the majority of the time they're a 3-piece. I think I've seen them as a 3-piece almost every single time, and maybe once or twice I've seen them with an extra guitarist.
Yeah. But yeah, so this is their, I guess people are saying it's their 8th studio album, but I don't think that's accurate. Because well, first of all,
let me jump in and talk about it for a second then. Okay. So they had Turning On, they had Cloud Nothings, the self-titled, but the band really, I mean, you want to talk about the album that kind of makes a band. I guess some people would say the self-titled Cloud Nothings from 2011 is the one, but Attack on Memory is the one that really put them on the map, and that's 2012. That's when I jumped on board. I tried to go back. I'm not all that interested in the stuff going back.
I didn't like this. I didn't care much for the self-titled album. I had Turning On, and I liked Turning On a lot. I was very excited by Cloud Nothings at that time, but then the self-titled just, I don't know, it just didn't excite me that much, and I didn't listen to that one a ton, and I haven't gone back and listened to it a ton today. It's probably my least favorite Cloud Nothings album.
So yeah, then Attack on Memory is the one in 2012 that really kind of puts them on the map. It was a big time producer. The sound took a giant leap forward in terms of production, and they started getting lots of attention from Rolling Stone, Spin, CMJ. I think they played the Pitchfork Festival after that.
That sounds right.
So it was a real turning point for the band.
Yeah, they worked with Steve Albini on that. And, you know, I mean, it sounds...
Which apparently they're tired of answering questions about Steve Albini.
Very much so. Even though they went back to him and he produced The Shadow I Remember, I believe. Or was it Black Hole Understands? I don't remember. I think it was...
If we ever get them on the podcast, the first question is going to have to be, so right, what was it like working with Steve Albini?
Yeah. And really the joke is that Steve Albini famously, like, doesn't do a whole lot. He typically sits there, turns everything on, and tells the band, go do whatever you want to do. And then he sits there and does a crossword puzzle, right? Like, he's not a hands-on producer in the way, say, Andrew Watt is, you know, or something like that. But yeah, so that album was so exciting because it was the most shocking turn from that self-titled album to Attack on Memory. It had an edginess, an energy to it, but it was still super catchy. The vocal melodies are flawless across that entire album. And it was just very exciting. And so I think while that wasn't the point that I jumped on board with them, that was the moment that it like went from, oh yeah, Cloud Nothings, that's a cool little Cleveland thing, to, oh my God, this is like an awesome band. And then they followed that up with Be Here Now, Here or Nowhere Else.
Well, before you get there, I don't know if you remember, you told me, I'd kind of heard of them, and then you told me about that record and that band, and then you're like, oh, they're from Cleveland. I was like, there's a Cleveland band that's like on the radar that's producing really great work. And that's when I started seeing them every single time I possibly could when they were in town.
Yeah. And when Here and Nowhere Else came out, that for me is my favorite Cloud Nothings album. That's the one that like really solidified them. When Craig and I did an episode where we talked about like bands who temporarily maybe held the belt as our favorite band, maybe wrestled that away from Pearl Jam for a second. Cloud Nothings, that was the moment for me that Cloud Nothings like kind of grabbed that belt, that it was like, this is the most exciting band for me in the world right now, was Cloud Nothings. So that
Well,
one
and the
really drew
highlight of
me
that
in.
one is there's a 7 minute and 23 second song called Pattern Walks,
It's
which is just a
just
journey.
incredible. The drumming and bass playing off
It's a
each other on that.
progressive punk rock journey.
Oh, it's so good. And then like Psychic Trauma is still one of the coolest songs anybody has ever written, with the tempo change right in the middle of the song. It's just so well done. It's just really clever, smart songwriting with infectious hooks, a really great sound to that album that actually took us a couple times to figure out. I remember the first time listening, both you and I had the same reaction of, boy, I don't know about the production on this one. You know, we were the,
It
boy, I don't know
sounds
about the
different.
production, because it sounded so different from Attack on Memory. But once you
It
get
did.
through that and kind of like really listen a couple times and figure out what's really going on, it really sank in. And that's sort of a recurring theme with Cloud Nothings. How you feel about them on your first listen is rarely how you're going to feel about them after 5 listens of their album. Because a lot of, again, to Craig's point about the drumming is so intricate. Sometimes it takes you a couple listens to even figure out what's going on with the beats, because the drumming is just all over the place. And then Dylan is such a unique guitar player. I mean, he's a phenomenal guitarist, and he
Well,
writes guitar parts.
it's been a journey, his guitar playing.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, and I've thought about this a lot with Foo Fighters too, that's going to be an odd thing to bring up Foo Fighters in the middle of a conversation about Cloud Nothings, but like everybody thinks about Dave Grohl as this guitarist who did Monkey Wrench and all those songs early on in his career. That dude's been playing guitar every day
Mm-hmm.
more than anybody in the world, or as much as anybody in the world. He is a much better guitar player today than he was when he wrote that first record. And
Yeah.
we think of these professional musicians as kind of like being, oh, well, you know, the same guitar player he was on that first record, he's the same guitar player today. It's just not the case.
Yeah.
And Dylan's guitar playing and his guitar sound,
Yeah.
whatever decisions he's making with effects and amps and actual guitars, it changes a little bit with every single record.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we'll get to it, by the way. We'll eventually get to Final Summer. The guitars are huge and warm and ferocious on this record, as much so as on any record they've ever done, which I think is really cool. But let's keep going.
So we'll just kind of talk a little bit. Life Without Sound then was the next album.
Which, by the way, that's my second favorite. That's my second favorite Cloud Nothings record. With the way that one starts, with the feeling I get when the piano notes start on Up to the Surface, it just sets. I get chills every time. It sets the mood for that entire record. I like the rest of that record too, but the way that song sets the tone is just everything to me. That's everything I love about music, and Cloud Nothings do it on that song.
Yeah, when we talk about great opening tracks, I mean, Cloud Nothings has certainly knocked that out of the park. No Future, No Past, and Up to the Surface, both just ridiculous opening tracks.
How crazy is that No Future, No Past is easily my favorite Cloud Nothings song. And then Up to the Surface is one of my favorite songs, both album beginners, album starters.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's something that, quite frankly, they're really good at doing. It's not even like, I would even say like on this new album, like the title track is the first track, Final Summer. That's a great opening track. They tend to be pretty good about getting you hooked right from the start, but Up to the Surface and No Future, No Past are just on the next level as far as opening tracks. But Life Without Sound was definitely their first real, if people like to call it, a vibe shift. That was kind of it was a more melodic record. It didn't rock as much.
When it was produced by John Goodmanson, who did Death Cab and Not a Surf and Slater Kinney.
Yeah, and so it's much more in that vein. But it's such a well-crafted album with really great songs that
by the way, I think that was a cop-out by me just there to name the producer. The producer's just the producer.
Yeah,
The
that's fair.
material.
That's fair.
Dylan wrote the material.
Right. We do that a lot. We talk a lot about producers, but I do think producers are extremely important. But yeah, that was like definitely a different sounding album, but one that I loved. It's always been my third favorite Cloud Nothings album. So we're splitting hairs there on that, but we both loved that one. And then after that, they kind of went on a little bit of a interesting journey. Last Building Burning was sort of a it seemed like they said, well, let's plug our guitars back in and like let's really get aggressive again. And it's probably their most ferociously aggressive album, which I really like that about it. And then you kind of go through I'm even forgetting maybe the order here. I think Black Hole Understands was next, which was a Bandcamp exclusive.
And by the way, we're in the middle of the pandemic, and Dylan is writing songs and releasing them, presumably to make a little bit of money. The Bandcamp subscription shows up, which you and I both joined.
Mm-hmm.
So, by the way, we're entitled to our criticism and our commentary because we are subscribers and fans.
That's right.
We've been paying attention. The Black Hole Understands is one of those records that, like, this is me being kind of dickish, but to me, it almost doesn't exist because it's exclusively on Bandcamp. It's not on streaming. I live on streaming, and so I can't access it easily. I don't listen to it all the time.
There are degrees of obscure Cloud Nothings albums because you can get the Black Hole Understands on vinyl, which I have it on vinyl. So for me, it's just part of my collection, which actually makes it easy to listen to. But they have an album, Life is Only One Event, which is
Andrew Schnitkey. Vinyl is easy to listen to.
Yes.
You're on record.
There we go. But Life is Only One Event is a album that was exclusively for Bandcamp subscribers. So whereas the Black Hole Understands, you just have to be on Bandcamp. Anybody can buy that album on Bandcamp. But they also release one only for their subscribers. So if you subscribe to them, there's an album, Life is Only One Event, and it's better than you think it is.
It's good.
It's a very strong album, but I've probably only listened to it a very small number of times because it's so buried to get to that album. So
I was going to say I've listened to it maybe 3 times.
Yeah.
And I liked it.
Yeah. It's really unfortunate because it's a good album, but it's just kind of buried in there. And then they did The Shadow I Remember, which is, that's the album they went back to working with Steve Albini. It doesn't sound like Attack on Memory, but I think in some ways it felt sort of like a reset for them. They were, again, just coming out of the pandemic. There were so many questions. At this point, Dylan had moved to Philadelphia. He was no longer living in Cleveland. He and Jason are writing a lot of stuff and sending stuff, through email. And it's just sort of felt like hitting a reset button. And that leads us to Final Summer now.
Hang on, one other thing. So in between The Shadow I Remember and Final Summer, they signed to Pure Noise Records.
Yeah, all very true, which is that's what Knocked Loose is on that label.
And Microwave.
It's a very different roster for them to be aligned with. But I almost like it because, again, they're kind of the elder statesmen of that group. Like they've been around so long that they're the veteran.
And maybe
presence.
Pure Noise can figure out a way to get those Bandcamp exclusive off of Bandcamp and onto streaming services so that they can live where they should with the rest of the catalog.
Or else put the subscriber one on vinyl. But I'm guessing they don't do it because they probably don't want it to be out. I suppose this is a way to make sure
they don't want to have to relearn them so that they have to play them in their set list.
So, anyways,
So I think we buried the lead successfully. So let's talk
yes.
about Final Summer, the new record that came out last week, competing with Taylor Swift and Pearl Jam. So you already mentioned that Final Summer, the title track, leads the record, and it's. I mean, certainly it rocks because they play guitars, but it's a little bit poppy.
Yeah.
It's a really good tune.
I think that in general, this album has a feel to me of blending things that I like about Here and Nowhere Else with the elements I like of Life Without Sound. It's a blend of that aggression and melodic feel that they have. In general, I would say like this is an album that, and I'm probably being inspired by the album cover, which is awesome, by the way. I love this album cover. And maybe I'm inspired by that, but like I get the feeling when I listen to this, like of like a summer night when it's like it's not cold, it's just the air is slightly cool, and driving your car with your windows down, like this is an album you would want to listen to in that setting. Just driving on that road and just rocking out to this album. I think that it's really the most consistent Cloud Nothings album since Life Without Sound. It's, again, there's not a track on here that I don't love. It's a very short album. With there's no sprawling rockers, there's no pattern walks on this or anything like that. But
let me jump in a second, because the album cover, like you said, is perfect. It's got the hues of kind of like orange, a little bit of gray, but it looks like warm. It looks like summer. Summer's in the title. This entire record is mostly 2 to 3 minute songs. They all sound like they fit together. There's some really good individual songs, but this is an album. This is a record that goes from front to back. And you're right, it doesn't have any of those really long experimental progressive with we're going to do multiple movements in the same song. It's so in some ways, and this is not me taking a shot or saying anything negative, it's not super challenging the way some of Cloud Nothing's previous material was. So I feel it's very approachable. It's just a really great sounding record. The guitars are huge, as I mentioned before, but they're very warm.
Mm-hmm.
It almost feels like there's a warmth to the guitar production that I can hear shining through. I love the way this record sounds. Once again, I love the way Dylan's vocals sound when he gets kind of guttural and screamy.
Yeah.
It has more of that white noise vibe of the vocal as opposed to like punching you in the face. So yeah, it's aggressive, and yeah, it's screamy and punk rock, but it blends with the rest of the instrumentation, including the drums and cymbals.
Yeah.
It's a really well produced record.
I think if I had any complaint about it, it would be, honestly,
it's too short.
Well, it is very short, but kind of tying into that is how many singles they put out. I think they did 4 singles off of this, right? Final Summer, Running Through Campus, I'd Get Along. I think they did one other. Silence, yeah. So
that's a you problem, by the way.
It's very much a me problem, but I hate when bands do this because I have a pre-existing notion of half of this album already going into it. And so your moments of discovery are interweaving with these moments that I already know these songs. And it's not just that feeling of discovery, like, we don't have to compare everything in the world to Pearl Jam, I know, but like, because it's so fresh in my mind, that experience of sitting in a theater. And at that point, I had only heard 2 Pearl Jam songs off of it. I had heard Dark Matter and Running, and that's it. So I was going into that so blind, and it was exhilarating not knowing what was coming next and hearing, where that album would go. And so I missed that a little bit from this album. But again, that's on me. That's definitely a me problem.
Well, and we all know why they do
it. Right. They're playing the game. Yeah.
This is a business. They're a small time band, as much as we love them. They're not headlining the Ohana Festival. They're not headlining Coachella.
Yeah.
This is a band that's hopefully a little bit better than Subsistence for Dylan and the rest of the members, so that they can continue to do this forever. But if by releasing Running Through the Campus ahead of time as a single, it's already up to 185,000 on Spotify alone. I'd Get Along's up to 141,000. How many listens would that have? Final Summer has 44,000. Daggers of Light has 35,000. With those other songs, so they got themselves 100 and some thousand listens of two individual songs.
Yeah.
And that's real dollars and cents for a smaller time band that doesn't have Pearl Jam. They weren't on Howard Stern.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
And so I don't begrudge them that. But I'm with you on the artistic side of it. I understand it completely, that for us, we want to hear it in context of the entire album.
Yeah.
But also it's on you to ignore it then. Don't listen ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly. So I actually tried not to as much as I could, but I just kept I liked all those singles so much that I just kept going back to them. But you know what else also?
See, and I'm not like that at all. So my wife is like that with TV. She doesn't mind a spoiler. She'll read ahead on like Wikipedia. She wants to know what's going to happen before she even watches it. But with TV, I'd never want to know. I don't want to know anything.
Yeah.
But with music, man, I want to hear those singles. I'll figure out the context later when I obsess over the record in context later.
Yeah. Hey, and another thing too is Cloud Nothings also know how to get vinyl out to their fans within a couple days of release, unlike a certain other band we've talked about today.
So when by the way, when was Dark Matter released?
19th. It was
4/19. Yep. And so how long ago did you get your vinyl?
Yeah,
so,
I'm still waiting for it. I have not gotten my vinyl yet. It shipped.
Well, that's really too bad.
It shipped on the 17th. It shipped on the 17th, and my original delivery date was Monday, and didn't show up on Monday. And then the tracking said it got shipped to Columbus, and then went to Cincinnati.
Hold up. When was Final Summer released?
On the 19th.
When did you get the vinyl?
On the 21st.
Wow, that seems better.
Oh, it gets better.
10 Club.
It gets better because the 10 Club sent it on the 17th. On the 19th.
So the headline of this episode is now going to be that Cloud Nothings are better than Pearl Jam.
Yeah, at delivering vinyl. On the 19th, the day of release, I did not have any shipping information yet. I sent an email to the merch store, the Cloud Nothings merch store. I said, hey, I haven't gotten a shipping update and its release date. They wrote a email back apologizing and said, we're sorry, here it's going out right now. Here's the tracking information. 2 days later, I had the album. Pearl Jam sent it out on the 17th. On the 22nd, it was in Columbus, where I live. And that was the day it was supposed to be delivered. Didn't show up at 7:00 when it said it would be here. So Tuesday, it said, oh, sorry, it's now delayed. It's going to be delivered on the 23rd. Look at the tracking information. It's in Cincinnati now for some reason. It left Columbus and went to Cincinnati. So but that's like, oh, but you'll get it by 7:00 on Tuesday. Nope, not happening. And now the tracking has been updated and it says it will be here on Friday, the 26th. Full week after, and that's if they even hit that release date. So I know you guys, I know none of you listeners care. This is my problem, but my goodness, when you pay $12 for shipping, like, pick a better shipping service and get your vinyl out to people. But
like Cloud Nothings. Like
I paid
Pure Noise Records.
$7 shipping, I think, is what Cloud Nothings charged me. Got it to me in 2 days. Give me a break. All right.
By the way,
I'll digress, but
Spanish Love Songs is also on Pure Noise.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, we have another topic for next week. Should we go ahead and spoil it since we went so long?
Yeah,
on,
we can.
Pearl Jam and Cloud
that's my
Nothings?
fault. When we had this one, I asked Craig. I said, "Can we just do a quick segment at the beginning? I just want to do kind of a."
I knew it was going to go a half hour. I was fully
known.
prepared for this.
I should have known, but yeah.
By the way, hang on. So, Final Summer. final thoughts. Like,
Oh,
obviously, you
yeah.
and I both love the record.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I totally digressed us by my vinyl complaining. I would say for me, big picture, I'm debating on whether this is going to be my third or fourth favorite Cloud Nothings album. So, Here and Nowhere Else, number one. Attack on Memories, number two for me. Those are pretty unimpeachable at this point. Like, it'd be really hard to knock those off. But so for me, the battle is with Life Without Sound. I have not, it's too early. I haven't decided yet if this is going to fall in at number three or number four. I suspect it'll probably be number four. I don't think it's going to get past Life Without Sound, but
which isn't a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing at all. This is, again, for Cloud Nothings, still 15 years later to still be making awesome albums like this is just incredible. They're a remarkable band. It doesn't feel like they're veterans, but they really are. And like, it's kind of cool to get to a point to see a band like this survive so long. Cause like, it is not an easy life as an indie band, you know, like they have to work really hard to make money. We've talked about this as well. Like, it's not like the old days when, you know, you could just sell CDs. You know, they have to do a lot of touring to make money. They have to play the monetization game of, you know, between subscriptions and then putting out exclusives. I mean, Dylan is giving a song every single month still to fans who subscribe. You get a new Cloud Nothing song delivered every single month. So they work really hard, and I'm really proud of them. They should be proud of this album. It's just phenomenal. It's going to be one of my favorite albums of the year. No doubt about that. I sort of wish it wasn't released the same day as Pearl Jam, so I could almost give this the repeated listens that it deserves. But I'm also really appreciative of this because without this, I wouldn't have stopped listening to Pearl Jam yet. And I want something to break that up. So I've been breaking up my listens of Dark Matter with this album, with Final Summer. And that alone is a testament to how good this album is that it's like the one thing that can get me to stop listening to Pearl Jam right now.
Yeah, I love this record. It's probably third for me. I love Attack on Memory, Life Without Sound. This is probably Final Summer will end up slotting in there at number three, and then Here and Nowhere Else. But like, I don't feel that way about Cloud Nothings where I need to rank the albums. I like them all. I like them all as complete works. I never, ever, unless I'm playing with the Spotify DJ or something, I never listen to a Cloud Nothing song unless I'm listening to the entire record, usually on a run or in a workout, something like that. But for me, these albums flow. They're complete works. I will always find time every year to listen to each record at least once, and some obviously more than once. And obviously, I'm with you. I wish this band all the success in the world. But I will say, as fans, one of the really great things about becoming a giant super fan of a band like this is that in June we're going to be able to see this band at Mayhall's in Lakewood, which is, I don't know if it's 300 or 400 or 500 people. It's not a big room. You can be super close to this band while they're crushing on stage. These are the concert experiences that I love the most. Yes, I'm going to Fenway to see Pearl Jam this summer. But honestly, truthfully, with no exaggeration, I am about as excited to see Cloud Nothings at Mayhall's as I am to see Pearl Jam at Fenway. It's going to cost me a fraction of the price. I'm going to be with a fraction of the people. This is what I love. This is what you get when you are willing to put in the work and listen to bands that don't have the same push of a label, that aren't on Howard Stern, that don't get the reach and the promotion. They're worthy of your time. You'll have just as much fun at their shows. You might get moshed on if you're in Cleveland, because every show seems to be a mosh pit show in Cleveland. But no, I promise you, it's worth diving in. And this record is so worthy, so worthy of their catalog.
Absolutely.
Of being slotted in.
Yep. No, well,
you have any
said.
Final thoughts?
No, I think that's pretty well said. There's nothing that I really disagree with there. All
right.
It's just a good listen from front to end again. So
All right, so next week, barring any schedule changes and topic changes, we are going to discuss the greatest American rock bands. Andrew and I are going to give you our greatest American rock bands. I totally geeked out. You might not know this about me, but I'm a total dork. So I created kind of an algorithm combining subjective scores on critical acclaim, longevity, peak, my preference, Andrew's preference, and then we summarized it. And so we're looking for the greatest American rock bands. What spawned this was a tweet by Bomani Jones, who's a sports guy, but he's also, I don't know how many people know this, he's a huge music guy. He used to be a music critic, has written a lot of words over his career about music. And I believe what he said was there's no American band that peaked more than maybe Guns N' Roses.
Mm-hmm.
And he said for him, the greatest American rock band based on peak was Guns N' Roses. And so that spawned our conversation. We probably changed the topic a little bit,
Sure.
but that's where we're going to go. So I don't know, tune in for that one.
Yeah. Unless I don't have my Pearl Jam vinyl. If I don't have Dark Matter on vinyl by next week, we're doing another entire episode on how much I can't stand shipping and
47 minutes about the 10 Club and why their logistics need lots and lots of work.
I mean, if you guys aren't excited for that episode, I don't know what's wrong with you, but no,
right,
I think
so for...
the greatest American rock bands episode, I think it's going to be interesting. Should spark some debate, hopefully, and people can tell me what an idiot I am for my takes on this, and that's fine. That's the fun of this for me. So.
Well, and they're just going to have to tune in to find out why you think it's Dave Matthews Band.
Yep.
All right, everybody. It's not Dave Matthews. But thanks so much for listening. We will talk to you next time. It's been the Album of Record podcast.